The envelope came on a Tuesday. No call, no heads up, just a cream-colored card wedged between utility bills and grocery flyers. My name, handwritten in thin ink, sat alone on the front. No return address. It wasn't surprise that hit me first. It was that strange quiet inside your chest when the world turns a little unfamiliar. I hadn't spoken to Tyler in over a month. Last I heard, they were still looking for a wedding venue. Apparently they found one, and sent me the news the same way the bank does impersonal cold distant. I opened it at the kitchen counter. No additional card inside. No note. Just the standard line, "You are invited to the wedding of Tyler Whitaker and Haley Parks." Date, time, location. Vineyard in Oregon wine country. Formal attire. RSVP by the end of the week. I read it twice. Then again. No mention of a mother of the groom's seat. No suggestion of a role. Not even a reserved table. For a moment I stared at the RSVP line pen hovering. Should I check? Yes. Show up in a dress that hadn't been worn in years. Sit politely through the toasts and pretend I wasn't forgotten. Or check no and let them carry on undisturbed by my presence. The thought came and went. I set the pen down and stood at the sink, rinsing off a mug with chipped glaze. That mug had been Tyler's favorite when he was 6. He used to call it his superhero cup. He thought drinking hot chocolate from it made him faster. That boy with the sticky hands and the gap-toothed grin, he would have wanted me there, wanted me front row, would have made a joke during his vows, looked over for my nod of approval. But that boy was long gone, replaced by a man who mailed his mother a wedding invitation like a company memo. I turned the card over again, just in case I missed something. There was nothing. You ever get invited to something and somehow feel more left out than if you'd never been invited at all? Yeah, it was that kind of silence. I slid the card back into the envelope and tucked it into the drawer next to the scissors and spare keys. I wasn't sure what I felt. Hurt maybe, but not the crying kind. The kind that makes you clean the counters twice in one night. And I already knew I'd go. Not for him, not for her, for me. Because when someone decides to write you out of the picture, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is show up, quietly, completely, and let them see what they no longer recognize. The morning after the envelope arrived, I pulled the garment bag from the back of my closet. It was covered in dust zipper, half stuck the plastic brittle with age. Inside was a lavender dress I bought on clearance 15 years ago. I had never worn it. It was one of those purchases you make when you still believe in having reasons to dress up again. I laid it across the bed. The fabric was dated, but the color still soft. It didn't scream elegance, but it whispered effort. I ran my fingers across the hem, then folded it back into the bag. It wasn't the one, so I took a bus to the thrift store on 9th and Delaney. Nothing fancy, just a storefront that smelled like lemon cleaner and patience. I spent 2 hours going through racks, careful not to rush. There was a quiet dignity in choosing something new for an event I hadn't been wanted at. I found a soft gray dress with tiny pleats down the front. It fit without needing alterations. I paid cash. On the way out, I grabbed a pair of flats from the $2 bin. Low heels, something I could walk in if the grass at the vineyard was uneven. Back home, I washed everything by hand, let it dry in the window. I ironed the pleats flat, laid it all out on the bed. Then I turned my attention to my hair. I hadn't been to a salon in years. I usually kept it tied back. But this time, I booked an appointment at one of those strip mall places. No fuss, just a basic blowout and a soft trim. I sat in the chair while the stylist made polite conversation. She asked if I was going anywhere special. I said my son was getting married. She smiled and said how lovely that must feel. I nodded. I didn't explain. I bought a small clutch at the drugstore to hold my keys and a single tube of lipstick, just enough to feel ready. I booked a ride for the morning of the wedding. Shared shuttle, cheapest option. No one would be waiting to open a car door for me, and that was fine. I wasn't there to be escorted. I was there because I chose to be. That night, I laid everything out in rows. Dress, shoes, clutch, hair tie, one tissue, just in case. And when I turned out the light, I didn't sleep easily, but I slept. Not because I was at peace, but because I was certain. There was no spot saved for me, so I would bring my own chair, and I would sit in it with both feet planted. No apology, no permission. The vineyard was tucked between two hills, rows of grapevines stretching into fog. The shuttle dropped me near the side gate, not the main drive. I walked along gravel, careful not to twist my ankle in the thin shoes. The air smelled of earth and champagne. The ceremony had already started. I kept to the back beneath a grove of oaks. There weren't ushers looking for strays. No one asked for my name. No one noticed. From where I stood, I could just make out Haley's dress through the haze, something lacy and expensive. Tyler's voice was faint, but I knew his tone, confident, public, the voice of someone who believed the world was built for him to stand on. I stayed until they kissed. Then I circled behind the main house and followed the noise toward the reception. White tents, string lights, folding chairs wrapped in satin, a 6-piece band playing something soft and easy. I checked in with the staff table. One of the younger servers looked me up and down. Name, I told her. She checked the clipboard. "There's no place card for you," she said flat. Then she looked toward the catering tent and pointed. "You can wait back there if you want." I didn't argue. I walked toward the back, past a row of plastic bins filled with melting ice. The staff tent was open on one side, the breeze pushing through trays of half-wilted greens and steam pans. I stood there unsure whether to sit or just disappear. Another server brought out a plate and handed it to me. Cold chicken, overcooked rice, one corner of cake missing the frosting, no utensils. She smiled like I should be grateful, then turned back to the others without another word. I sat on an overturned crate near a stack of folding chairs. Someone had dropped a linen napkin in the dirt, and it clung to my heel like static. Laughter erupted from inside the tent. Toasts, glasses clinking. A voice announced Tyler's name and called him up to speak. The microphone caught his breath, and the first words he said were a thank you to Haley's parents for raising such a wonderful daughter, for their love, their generosity, for treating him like their own. The applause went on longer than it should have. He didn't mention me, not once. I finished half the chicken, then left the plate where it was. The breeze had picked up. It carried the scent of flowers I hadn't been given, of music I hadn't been invited to dance to. I didn't cry. It was something quieter than that, the kind of silence you only hear inside your own bones, the kind you don't explain later because you know nobody ever really wants to understand it. I sat with the plate balanced on my knees. The chicken was still rubbery, the rice stuck together like paste. No fork. I used a plastic spoon someone had tossed near the drink station. It bent with every bite. The laughter carried from the tent. Tyler's voice rang out louder now, speaking to the crowd. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught enough. Toasts about love, about family, about beginnings. Each sentence landed like a quiet bruise. I looked down at the corner of cake. The icing had melted to one side. There was a smudge where someone's thumb had pressed it into the plate. The crate I sat on wobbled. I shifted my weight and reached into my purse. I didn't have much in there. Lipstick, a comb, and a folded photo. It was creased from years of being taken out and put back. Tyler, at 6 years old, standing barefoot in the kitchen, holding a cookie with both hands. grinning like he'd just built a rocket ship out of tin foil. That boy would have sat beside me with chocolate on his face. He would have begged me to stay until the music stopped. He would have pulled my arm and made me dance. I folded the photo and returned it to the purse. The boy was gone. The man had made that clear. The servers moved past me, stacking plates and trays. None of them looked twice. I might as well have been part of the linen pile, disposable, meant to be cleared away after the celebration. Inside the tent, someone struck the rim of a glass. More clinking followed. A voice yelled something cheerful, the kind of joy that fills a room when no one notices who's missing. The sun dipped low. Golden light fell across the gravel path and caught in the folds of my dress. I hadn't noticed how dusty the hem had become. The shoes pinched now. My toes ached. I stood slowly, stiff from sitting too long on cold plastic. I left the plate near the stack of bins. Someone would toss it later. I walked past the main entrance where guests took photos with wine glasses. Nobody turned. I wasn't in any of the pictures. I didn't belong in the album. Back near the shuttle stop, I paused at the edge of the field. From a distance, the vineyard was beautiful. Rows of vines in perfect lines, sunset behind them. It looked like something worth remembering. But I didn't take a photo. I didn't need to. Some memories stay sharper when you don't try to capture them. And that moment standing outside something I used to be part of that would stay longer than any picture ever could. I didn't cry. There was nothing left in me soft enough to break. Only something still, something cold. Not unlike the chicken on that plate. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't angry. I was done. The apartment lease was still in my name. I had almost forgotten. After the wedding, I returned home and opened the bottom drawer of my file cabinet, the kind with the rusted rails and sticky folders. Inside, tucked between an old tax form and a faded insurance bill, was the original deed. My name alone. No cosigners, no addendums, no transfers. 20 years ago, I bought the building as an investment, a small 4-unit place in southeast Portland, the kind of purchase you make when you're still hopeful. Tyler had just started high school back then. I imagined he might use the rental income one day to support a family, maybe live in one of the units while finishing school. Things changed. He moved in 5 years ago, took over the upstairs unit after I offered him a generous deal on rent, half the market rate, utilities included. I never asked for much. I thought giving him stability was enough, but the wedding showed me something I hadn't been willing to see. He no longer saw me as part of his life, just a tool, a background figure. I pulled out the latest rental statement. Automatic deposits still came into my bank account each month, but something else caught my eye. A letter from a property management company, not one I had hired. Their logo was clean modern, the kind of branding Haley would pick. It stated they had begun onboarding services for Unit 2B. That was Tyler's. I checked the envelope, addressed to Tyler, not me, but it had come to my mailbox. Attached was a form requesting landlord authorization for renovations, kitchen updates, wall paint changes. They had typed my name under landlord, but left the signature line blank. There was no mistake. He was preparing to transfer control. He hadn't asked, hadn't called, hadn't mentioned any of this. I flipped the paper over and did the math. Tyler paid $600 a month. That was charity. The market rate had more than doubled in the last 5 years. The other tenants were paying close to full price. And here he was, planning to repaint and possibly refinance a property that was never his to begin with. He had already stepped into the role, speaking to agents, making updates, presenting himself as the authority, without ever acknowledging the hand that gave it to him. I leaned back in my chair. The office was quiet, the fan spinning low above me. This wasn't about revenge. This was about correction. Sometimes you don't need to fight. You just need to stop holding the net and let the fall speak for itself. I started by pulling out every lease agreement from the building's records. The yellow folders were labeled by year, and Tyler's file was the thinnest. One page unsigned, a courtesy document I had drafted when he moved in, but never made him sign. I had written a note on the back in pencil. For Ty. No deposit needed, just pay what you can. I slid that folder aside and moved on to the rest. Judy Ellis lived downstairs. 72 retired nurse walked with a cane, always paid on time, never asked for much. 2 months ago, she called to tell me Tyler had suggested she might want to relocate. He offered to help her find a new place, said he was considering opening the unit for a short-term lease model. I hadn't thought much of it then. Now it felt different. I called Judy and asked if we could talk in person. She met me in the lobby. Same wool cardigan, same slow shuffle. Her eyes were sharp, though. She sat beside me on the bench near the elevator and pulled out a folder. He gave me this, she said. Inside were typed letters. One of them outlined an increase in rent starting next month. No signature, no header, just bold numbers and a forwarding address for payment. A P.O. box that didn't belong to me. She said he never raised his voice, just spoke like it was already decided. She had lived there for 11 years. I asked if she'd be willing to write a statement, not for legal action, just a record. She nodded, said she'd already drafted one. She had watched too many people her age get pushed aside quietly. Back at home, I scanned everything. Judy's letter, the unauthorized rent notice, a copy of the unsigned lease, the payment logs showing Tyler's discount. Then I called the bank and requested account statements for the past 2 years. I wanted a clean summary of every deposit tied to the property. It wasn't for revenge. I needed clarity, the truth written in numbers. I made a binder with tabs. Each page told a small story. Together they made something harder to ignore. The last thing I did that night was open a new file on my laptop. I labeled it quietly. Nothing dramatic, just a single word. Control. Then I drafted a list, not of people to confront, but of steps to take. Contact property attorney, verify ownership records, confirm jurisdiction on tenant rights, pull public property tax history. I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt like someone waking up after a long sleep. Sometimes power doesn't come from raising your voice. It comes from knowing the paperwork better than they do. I called Judy again that Monday morning. She picked up after the second ring and said she had thought about my question. If the unit was still available, she would consider buying it, but only if I was serious, only if I was ready to make a change that didn't come with guilt sewn into the seams. I told her I wasn't in the habit of bluffing. That afternoon, I met with my attorney. His office was downtown, tucked behind a strip of medical offices and a dry cleaner. No fancy decor, just thick files stacked along the wall and a wooden desk worn at the corners. His name was Leonard Grossman, 74. No nonsense. I handed him the binder and said I needed 2 things: a formal notice of intent to end a lease without renewal, and a transfer form that allowed me to shift ownership of a single unit through private sale. He flipped through the documents. His eyes stopped at the unsigned lease, then the rent increase typed on blank paper, then the P.O. box. He didn't say much, just nodded and started writing. 3 days later, the letter went out by certified mail. 1 for Tyler, 1 for the management company, a 3rd for the building file. Tyler had 60 days to vacate. No exceptions, no extensions. I included a clause that barred unauthorized renovations or financial adjustments during the transition. The second form was shorter, a purchase agreement between me and Judy Ellis for Unit 2B. Market price reduced slightly for loyalty. No broker involved. Clean transfer, simple math. She signed it the next morning. At the title office, I watched her hand shake slightly as she filled in her information. She looked tired but steady, like someone who had waited years for the ground beneath her feet to feel solid again. Back home, I scanned the final documents and sent them to Leonard. Then I turned my attention to the IRS. I filed a quiet review request, a routine flag. I attached copies of Tyler's management forms, the unregistered rent increases, and the income history he had funneled through another name. It wasn't an accusation, just a nudge, enough to let the system do what it was built for. By the end of the week, everything was moving, quietly, properly, no shouting, no drama, just papers, signed, filed, sent. Tyler hadn't replied to the notice yet. Maybe he hadn't opened the envelope. Maybe he was still living like he owned something he never earned. That was no longer my concern. The wheel had turned, the circle had tightened, and for the first time in a long while, I slept through the night without needing to check the locks. Tyler's email arrived late Thursday night. The subject line was 3 words. Why this now? I stared at it without opening. For a moment, I considered deleting it without reading, but I clicked. Not out of curiosity, just to see how many sentences it would take before he said the word mother. 7. It took 7 full lines. Before that, it was confusion, offense, accusations. He asked why I was sabotaging his plans. He said he had worked hard to make the unit feel like a real home, that he and Haley had spent weeks organizing furniture deliveries, scheduling paint contractors, that they had already given notice on their old apartment. He used the word betrayal twice. He said I had blindsided him. I read it once, then closed the tab. There was no rage in me. Not anymore. I opened a new draft and typed 1 line. The answer lies in how you treated me at your wedding. Then I hit send. No salutation, no signature, just clarity. By the next morning, Haley had called the management company. I know because I received a copy of their inquiry. It was professional in tone, but I could feel the panic beneath the words. They asked for confirmation about ownership, whether the termination letter was real, whether Tyler had legal authority to authorize their services. I didn't respond. I forwarded it to Leonard instead. He sent back a clean reply. Please direct all correspondence to the listed property owner, Marlene Whitaker. I printed it and filed it in the blue folder marked Notices Sent. By Sunday, the letters began coming in. One from Haley's father, a short note typed on letterhead from his accounting firm. He offered to discuss an alternative arrangement, suggested a buyout, asked if I would consider a counteroffer to keep the property within family hands. I didn't answer that one either. The same day I heard from Judy. She had begun moving in small boxes, labeled each one in Sharpie, linens, cookware, photo albums. She said she hadn't felt this safe in years, that the walls already felt warmer. It was the quiet kind of justice, the kind that didn't ask for applause. That afternoon, I passed the building and saw Tyler's car parked sideways along the curb. He stood near the gate phone pressed to his ear, pacing. His jacket hung loose over one arm. He looked like he was waiting for someone to explain how things had gotten this far. But I kept walking. My name was still on the mailbox, but his name was fading fast. From the lease, from the records, from the space he once assumed would always be his. And in that silence between steps, I didn't feel cruel. I felt precise. Sometimes the sharpest answer is the one you give without raising your voice. And sometimes the first time someone listens is when you finally stop explaining. Haley posted a photo that week, a blurry picture of their dog sitting in a pile of moving boxes. The caption said something about new beginnings and temporary transitions. The tone was cheerful, forced. I didn't like the post. I didn't comment, but I read it twice. Later that day, my phone buzzed. Leonard had forwarded me a copy of the final notice of vacancy acknowledgement. Tyler had signed it. The date scribbled beside his name looked rushed, almost like the pen barely touched the paper. I studied it longer than I should have, not because I doubted the outcome, but because I had once known his handwriting better than my own. They had 60 days, no extensions. The clock was ticking. 2 other tenants in the building had emailed me separately. One just wanted to say thank you for resolving the noise issue upstairs. The other asked if the rent increase rumors were real. I assured them nothing would change for those who had honored their agreements. Quiet loyalty deserved protection. That same evening, a package arrived on my porch. No return label. Inside was a glass vase, the one I had given Tyler for his first apartment. Still had the chip on the rim. No note, just the vase. I wrapped it in a towel and placed it in the donation box by the door. Some things carry too much weight to keep around. The next weekend, I went by the unit to do a quick exterior check. I didn't plan to knock, just wanted to confirm the contractors hadn't started anything unauthorized. The porch light was on, though it was still broad daylight. Tyler's car wasn't there. What caught my eye was the front window. The blinds were crooked, as if someone had pulled too hard. Behind them, I saw Haley sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a stack of papers. Her elbows were on the table, her hands in her hair. She didn't move. I didn't stay long. Some realizations are meant to happen in solitude. At the mailbox downstairs, I picked up 2 envelopes addressed to previous tenants. Junk mail mostly, but one caught my eye. It was from a credit monitoring agency. Tyler's name, wrong unit number. I returned it to sender. This was no longer his address, and I was no longer his safety net. On the walk home, I passed the bakery where I used to take Tyler after school. The awning was new, the smell still familiar. I bought a single croissant and ate it on the bench outside. The crumbs fell into my lap, and I let them stay there. It felt like shedding, like leaving behind a skin that had held too many silences. The world didn't look different, but I was beginning to. The moving truck pulled away just after noon. I didn't watch it drive off. I had no reason to. I waited until the building felt still again, until the sounds of boxes and short commands no longer echoed up the stairwell. Then I walked up the narrow steps to Unit 2B one last time. The front door stood open. The key was in the knob. No note, no apology, just absence, the kind that didn't need explanation anymore. Inside the place was cleaner than I expected, but not clean in the way you would leave something with love. The walls were stripped bare, no nails, no marks. The floors still had the faint lines from where the couch legs had pressed into the wood. I stepped into the kitchen. A single glass remained in the drying rack, one of the mismatched ones from my old cupboard set, faded green, the rim slightly chipped. I wrapped it in a dish towel and placed it in the box I had brought with me. The rest of the cabinets were empty, but in the corner drawer I found something that didn't belong. A photo, black and white, bent at the corners. It was of Tyler, maybe 5 years old, standing in the backyard in swim trunks, holding a garden hose like it was a sword, laughing. I had taken that picture on a Saturday in July. We had stayed outside until dusk. His fingers were wrinkled from the water. He had hugged me that night without being asked. I slipped the photo into my pocket, not because I wanted to keep it, but because I couldn't bear to leave it behind. When I locked the door behind me, I didn't hesitate. The lock clicked without ceremony. Downstairs, Judy was trimming her windowsill plants. She looked up and waved. I nodded, quietly. Back home, I placed the box on the kitchen counter. Then I removed the glass, unwrapped it, and set it in the sink. I let the towel fall on the floor. Tomorrow I would wash it. Maybe. That night, I didn't check my phone. I didn't scroll. I didn't reread the messages. I opened the window beside my bed and listened to the sound of the street below. A dog barking 3 houses down. Wind rustling the leaves on the maple tree. The world continuing. Sometimes goodbye does not come with a slammed door or final word. Sometimes it's just a locked unit, a forwarded address, a space made for someone who never expected to be given it. I had done what needed to be done, not to win, not to punish, but to walk away holding the one thing no one else can claim: peace. The first morning in Idaho smelled like pine and clean earth. I had arrived just after dark the night before, too tired to notice much beyond the outline of the small wooden cabin and the way the gravel crunched beneath the tires of the moving van. Now light spilled through the wide kitchen window, brushing across the knotty pine floor. The cabin was modest. 2 rooms, 1 bookshelf, a porch that faced the lake. No TV, just a small radio tucked near the sink. I hadn't brought much. The quiet settled around me like a blanket. I unpacked the mugs first, then the journals. The last thing I placed was the vase I had once meant to give away. It sat on the windowsill now, empty. For once that felt fine. 2 days later, I walked into the bookshop on Main Street. The bell above the door chimed softly. Shelves lined the walls, floor to ceiling, filled with paperbacks and handwritten labels. The woman behind the counter looked up and smiled, like she already knew my name. I filled out a short form, a part-time position, sorting shelving, helping with inventory, something to do with my hands, something steady. The owner said I could start Monday. On the way home, I stopped at the farmer's stand near the edge of town, bought carrots with the greens still on, a loaf of bread wrapped in brown paper. The man who sold them asked nothing more than how I liked the weather. I said it was exactly right. Evenings came slower here. The lake turned orange near sunset. I sat on the porch with a blanket over my knees, sipping tea from a chipped cup. Sometimes I read. Sometimes I just listened to the wind moving through the trees. It wasn't about starting over. It was about starting quieter, not forgetting, but choosing what to carry forward. I began writing again. Not a memoir, not a list of wrongs, just pieces of days, bits of conversations I heard in the shop, the way the sky looked when it rained, a record of stillness. One morning, a stray cat appeared on the porch, skinny, striped, cautious. I left a bowl of water and a few scraps of chicken near the steps. By dusk, it was asleep beneath the rocker. I didn't name it. Some things didn't need to be owned to feel like they belonged. In the hush between pages and footsteps, I felt something I hadn't held in years. A life that fit, quietly, perfectly, without needing to be explained. The bell above the bookstore door chimed as I locked up. Rain had just stopped, leaving streaks on the window and the faint smell of wet gravel in the air. I tucked my hands into my coat and stepped out, letting the quiet evening fold around me. On my way home, I passed 2 girls laughing under one umbrella, the kind of laughter that fills the whole street. I didn't know them, but I smiled anyway. There was a softness in watching other lives unfold without needing to be part of them. Back at the cabin, the cat had taken its usual place on the porch rail, tail curled around its feet, eyes half closed. It didn't move when I stepped near, just flicked one ear like it had been listening the whole time. Inside, I boiled water for tea. Same chipped cup, same cinnamon blend I had always saved for winter. I sat near the window, steam rising, and stared out at the lake. The surface was still dark as glass, catching the light from the porch bulb. A knock might come one day, maybe a letter, maybe nothing at all. And I had made peace with every version of that. People say healing looks like forgiveness, like reunion. But sometimes it just looks like not turning around when someone calls too late. Sometimes it looks like letting the past keep walking while you choose not to follow. 1 week ago, a young woman in the shop had asked if I had children. Her voice was soft, like she was trying not to pry. I had smiled and said I used to. Then I went back to shelving fiction. And that was the end of it. No explanation, no correction, just a sentence that held everything and nothing at once. Sometimes what makes a story powerful is not how it ends, but who chooses to stop telling it. And I had told mine long enough. If this story found its way into something you've lived or something you've felt in silence, know this. You are not the only one. And maybe, just maybe, it's time to choose peace over permission. If any part of Marlene's story touched you, you're welcome to share a quiet thought in the comments. No pressure, just space, a place to breathe and to be heard.